Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu. After hearing the case for 40 days, the Supreme Court has reserved its verdict in the Ayodhya case. There are a few things that you must know. Number 1, the Supreme Court bench which heard this case was presided over by the Chief Justice of India, Mr. Gokul. The Chief Justice is retiring on November 17. If the verdict is not delivered by then, the case will have to be heard afresh. Because according to the convention, a Supreme Court bench that hears a case also delivers the verdict. If a judge retires before the verdict is delivered, a new bench is constituted and the matter is heard afresh. That's number 1. Number 2, this was the second longest case heard by the Supreme Court since independence. The longest case heard by the Supreme Court was Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala in the year 1973. It was in this case that Supreme Court propounded the doctrine of basic structure. Supreme Court said, yes, Parliament has the power to amend any provision of the Indian Constitution, but not the basic structure. What is this basic structure? Supreme Court did not elaborate. But later on, through successive verdicts of the Supreme Court, we now have a long list of what all are part of the basic structure. So secularism is part of the basic structure. Separation of powers is part of the basic structure. Rule of law is part of the basic structure. The objectives mentioned under the preamble to the Indian Constitution, they are part of the basic structure. Federalism is part of the basic structure. Article 21 is part of the basic structure. Independence of judiciary is part of the basic structure. So the longest case heard by the Supreme Court was the Keshavananda Bharati case, which was heard by the Supreme Court for 68 days. The second longest case is this Ayodhya case, which the Supreme Court has heard for 40 days. And the third longest case, the Aadhaar case, which was heard by the Supreme Court for 38 days. That's number 2. Number 3, the Allahabad High Court in 2010 had ordered the division of the disputed 2.77 acres of land equally. 1/3 would go to Nirmohi Akhara, 1/3 will be given to Ram Lalla Virajman, and 1/3 to the Sunni Waqf Board. Now this present case in the Supreme Court is an appeal to this Allahabad High Court verdict of 2010. Parallelly, there was an attempt at mediation as well. The Supreme Court had set up a mediation panel consisting of former Supreme Court Judge Mr. Khalifullah, spiritual guru Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and senior advocate Sri Ram Panchu. The Supreme Court had attempted to try and see if there is an out-of-court settlement to this emotive and controversial matter. It seems maybe there is an out-of-court settlement possible. If news reports are to be believed, the Muslim side is ready to give up its claim over the disputed land. If that happens, this may be a turning point in the Hindu-Muslim relations and can lead to communal harmony between the two communities. Such matters are better left to be resolved through consensus, through mediation, rather than through courts. Let's hope there is an out-of-court settlement to this Ayodhya case. There is another article on page number 1 related to Justice Arun Mishra. We'll take up this article along with an editorial on the similar issue. Let's look at another newspaper article. 20th Livestock Census was released. Now what is milch cattle? Milch cattle is basically animals or cows that are kept for the purpose of milk production. According to this census, there are 4.85 crore desi or native breeds of milch cows, but at the same time there are 2.5 crore exotic and crossbreed cattle. The objective of the central government was to increase the desi breeds And it seems that this objective has had little impact because the foreign breeds now have the population that is more than half of the population of the Desi breeds. But to understand this newspaper article in great detail, we need to know some points related to Rashtriya Gokul mission. Can be an important question for your prelims examination. This mission was launched in December 2014. But what was the purpose of this mission? The purpose was that we should develop the indigenous breeds or the Desi breeds, as well as we should conserve these Desi breeds. The objective was that we should also enhance the milk production in this country so as to make this country self-sufficient in milk. The objective also was to arrange artificial insemination services at farmers' doorstep. So this was the objective of Rashtriya Gokul mission. The objective was that we should develop the indigenous breeds, we should also conserve them, we should enhance milk production, and we should arrange artificial insemination services at the farmer's doorstep so that we are able to develop these indigenous breeds. In your prelims examination, you might be asked to identify which are the elite indigenous breeds in India. So you should remember the names of elite indigenous breeds in this country. We have Gir, Sahiwal, Rathi, Dioni, Thar Parkar, and Red Sindhi. These are elite indigenous breeds in this country. Now there are two important awards that you must know. Number one, those individual farmers who maintain the best herd of indigenous breeds, these individual farmers will be awarded Gopal Ratna Awards. So that's number one. Number two, if there are institutions, NGOs, Gaushalas, and if these maintain the best herd of indigenous breeds, then these institutions will be awarded Kamdenu Awards. That means we have two sets of awards. Gopal Ratna Award is for individuals or farmers, while Kamdenu Award is for institutions, NGOs or Gaushalas who maintain the best herd of indigenous breeds. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news, and this is a significant statement coming from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. According to him, during the recent second informal India-China summit at Mamallapuram, President of China had pitched for a trilateral cooperation among India, China as well as Pakistan. You only need to remember this. You can quote this in your GS mains answers because it's a significant statement. So that means the Chinese side is pitching for a trilateral important relationship among the three countries, India, Pakistan and China. Now let's look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper. Number one, refusing to recuse. We have had a land acquisition law of 1894. The law was passed during the British rule, and the principal objective of this law was forceful acquisition of land, which means that if the British wanted to lay down railway tracks, they would forcefully acquire the land without paying any compensation to the owner or with very little compensation. Now this law was replaced by right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement act of 2013. This was a beautiful law. The objective of this law was not only to acquire land, but the objective was that there should be fair compensation as well. That means if this land is in a rural area, then 4 times market price should be given to the owner. And if this land is in the urban area, then 2 times market price should be given to the owner. Not only fair compensation, there should be rehabilitation as well as resettlement. That means those who are dependent on this land, they should be compensated, they should be rehabilitated as well, they should be resettled as well. So this was a very humane law. But the section 24 clause 2 of this 2013 law has been a bone of contention. has been an area of concern even in the judicial circles. How? According to this section, if a developer has acquired a land but he has failed to take the possession of this land for 5 years. That means there is a developer who has acquired land from owners, but he has failed to take the possession of this land for 5 years. Or if the compensation is not paid to the owner, then that would mean that this land acquisition process would lapse. That means before 2013, this Land Acquisition Act of 1894 was in operation. The law of 2013 stated that from now onwards, if a developer had acquired a land under 1894 law, but for 5 years the developer failed to take the possession of this land, or if the compensation is not paid to the owner, then what would happen? This land acquisition process would lapse. That means the land acquisition process would have to start again, that too under 2013 law. Because previously the land was acquired under 1894 law. Now if for 5 years you have not been in a position to take over the possession of this land or provide compensation to the owner, now that land acquisition process would lapse. Now the land acquisition process would start afresh under the 2013 law, because here more and more benefit will be given to the owner of this land, because now the owner of this land would get much better compensation, 4 times the market price or 2 times the market price if the land is in the urban area. In 2014, the Supreme Court had to interpret this section 24 clause 2 of the Land Acquisition Act. A 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court said, yes, this law is correct. That means if the developer had acquired the land under 1894 law, but he has failed to provide compensation, or he has failed to acquire this land, to take the possession of this land, then this land acquisition aspect will lapse. New land acquisition process will have to be started under 2013 law. But something happened in 2018. Again, a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court was set up, and this 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court overruled the 2014 verdict of the Supreme Court. And one judge who was part of this 2018 judgment was Justice Arun Mishra. But what Supreme Court bench did in 2018 was against the convention, because this was unusual. How can a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court overrule the verdict of a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court? Because here the doctrine of precedent was violated. What is this doctrine of precedent? That means if previously a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court has given an order, the 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court has to follow that. And that leads to something called judicial discipline. A 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court, its verdict could have been overruled only by a larger bench. So if a 5-judge bench would have been constituted in 2018, then this bench could have overruled the 2014 verdict. But how can the judge bench of the same strength overrule the judgment given by a similar strength judge bench? That is something which is against the convention, which is unusual, because doctrine of precedent has been violated. Now what happened after that? A 5-judge bench was set up. Now this 5-judge bench will have to decide what is the correct legal position of section 24 clause 2. Because there are conflicting judgments by the 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court. In 2014, 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court said something. In 2018, a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court said exactly the opposite. So what is the correct legal position on this matter? Now a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court will have to decide. But here, Justice Arun Mishra is part of this 5-judge bench. So there have been petitions, there have been newspaper articles, there have been columns which have been requesting Justice Arun Mishra that you should recuse from hearing this case. There are people who are stating that a judge should recuse from hearing a case if there is a conflict of interest, or if the judge is biased in favor of one position or against the other. This editorial says that there is a compelling reason for Justice Arun Mishra to withdraw from their land acquisition case because there is an element of conflict of interest. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another very important column, taking national data seriously. It's a very important column, but we will not discuss this column today. We are coming up with an elaborate video lecture on the data, on the data localization, on data security. Please wait for that video lecture. Everything would be clear. Now let's look at another column. The operative word must be bilateralism, written by Javeer Shergill, who is the spokesperson of the Congress Party. This column is about the India-US relationship. The writer says that India-US relationship have had shades of good, bad, and the ugly. Good was the Indo-US nuclear deal of 2008. The bad was the current trade war that US has with China and where India has been hyphenated with China. So there are talks that United States is aggressively pushing that WTO should remove India from the category of nations which are developing nations category. India should be removed from this category. And the ugly has been when United States sent its fleet towards India to assist Pakistan during 1971 war. But the writer says that there are too many goods that have happened between the two countries, but still there are points of concern. Points of concern, number one, the example of the Kurds. Kurdish fighters and Turkey, they have been fighting against each other for a long time now. Now there were Kurds who were supporting the United States in the war in Syria. That means United States was supporting the Kurds fighters because these Kurd fighters were fighting the Islamic State as well. Now suddenly what Donald Trump decided? He decided to withdraw from Syria, and ultimately these Kurds have been exposed to Turkey. And now Turkey has been waging a long fight against these Kurdish fighters in Syria as well. So the writer says, what if tomorrow a similar thing happens to India? Because United States wanted India to send its troops to Afghanistan so that in Afghanistan we can closely and together fight the Taliban. But today Taliban and United States in all likelihood are talking to each other so that there is peace in Afghanistan. Because right now what United States is looking at, it is looking at an honorable exit. It wants to exit from Afghanistan but honorably so that there is a semblance of peace and normalcy in Afghanistan. For that, Taliban is a must. That means there are back channel talks, diplomacy going on between United States and Taliban, between Pakistan and Taliban, between important world powers and Taliban, so that Taliban can be pushed towards the negotiating table, so that Taliban can shed its terrorist ideology and can embrace the path of democracy. But the only country which has been left out of these negotiations is India. So if India would have accepted United States' request to take part in the peace process in Afghanistan, to send its troops to Afghanistan, what if United States would have left Afghanistan and then India and Taliban would be fighting against each other and Taliban would be part of the government in Afghanistan? That would have been very tricky for India. That means there are some points of concern because the US foreign policy now is fickle-minded. You never know what Donald Trump is going to do tomorrow. Similar thing happened with the Iran nuclear deal. Iran nuclear deal was signed in the year 2015 between United States, P5 plus 1 countries and Iran. P5 includes United States, that means 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, plus Germany and Iran. All these countries forged Iranian nuclear deal in 2015. Now what happened? Suddenly, Donald Trump decided to withdraw from this Iran nuclear deal. That means the US foreign policy is now fickle-minded, and this is where China is entering into the picture. So we will see an example towards the end of this lecture how the withdrawal of United States in different parts of the world is leaving scope open for China to enter. And now the world is becoming more or less bipolar, where one pole is dominated by the United States and the other pole is dominated by the Chinese. So that's another point of concern. Another point of concern is CAATSA. What is CAATSA? Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. That means how can America counter its adversaries? Through sanctions. That means if any country is conducting deals of significant nature with Iran, with North Korea, or with Russia, the US government will impose sanction on those countries. This has happened with Turkey, because when Turkey signed S-400 deal with Russia, the sanctions were imposed against the Turkey because S-400 defense system is manufactured by Russia. That means through CAATSA, the United States can impose sanctions against those countries which are conducting transactions of significant nature with Iran, North Korea or Russia. We have already zeroed out the oil import from Iran. But on S-400 system, we have been adamant that India is not going to be bullied. We are going to purchase S-400 defense system from Russia. But this is another area of concern between India and United States. We never know, tomorrow US can impose sanctions against India because we have been buying S-400 defense system from Russia. Another point of concern is Pakistan. There was a time when Donald Trump said Pakistan is a friend I don't need, and today Pakistani Prime Minister is a friend of United States and Donald Trump says he's my very close friend, a very dear friend and very sharp individual. That means the US foreign policy under Donald Trump has been fickle-minded. But even then there is a potential. The potential is both India as well as United States, they believe that Chinese influence should be contained. They share a common perception, and this convergence of perception by the two countries will help to reshape the global order. That's what Javier Shergill says, that although the Indo-US relationship, they have had shades of good, bad and ugly, there are also points of concern. Something related to the Kurdish question, something related to Pakistan, something related to the CAATSA. But even then, there is a potential in trade between India and United States. And India and United States, they share a common perception about China. That means Chinese influence should be contained. They share this common perception, and this convergence of perception can be used by the two countries to reshape the global order. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper column. Now let's look at another issue, another editorial, agents of change. There is an old saying, educate a woman and you educate the whole society. This saying has now been proven to be true. A comprehensive national nutrition survey was released by the Health Ministry. This survey showed that there is a direct correlation between the nutritional status of children and the mother's education. If a mother is educated, her children receive better nutrition. This survey studied 1.2 lakh children between the year 2016 and 2018. Now let's look at some of the facts related to this survey. Children of mothers with zero schooling, those mothers who have never received any schooling, only 11.4% children, they received adequate meals. But the children of mothers who finished class 12, 31.8% received diverse meals, while 9.6% of children whose mothers had finished schooling, they got minimum acceptable diets. Only 3.9% of children whose mothers had zero schooling got such a diet. This proves that we need to take care of female literacy. In 2011 census, female literacy was 65.46%, while the male literacy was 82.14%. If we need to tackle hunger, malnutrition and other challenges, We need to raise educational standard of women and improve our female literacy. That's what former American First Lady Michelle Obama said, because we know that when girls are educated, their countries become stronger and more prosperous. This is a quote that you can use in your essays as well. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper editorial. Now let's look at some of the prelims based questions. This island in 2019 was leased to a Chinese company for 75 years. This island was captured by Japanese during World War II. This island is part of Solomon Islands. Which island is referred to in the above statements? Tulagi Island. What is the context? This is where the Tulagi Island is. It's part of the Solomon Islands. You need to understand the map as well. Can be an important map-based question for your examination. This is where Australia is. Solomon Islands, midway between the Tropic of Capricorn and Equator. What is the context? Chinese firm has leased an entire Pacific island for 75 years. And the name of this island is Tulagi. This was the island which was captured by the Japanese. And if you look at the geography tells you that this is a very important and strategically located island. And it is China's interest that whenever they see an opening, they want to establish military bases, they want to industrialize those areas so that they can set up military bases and ultimately challenge the US hegemony in this region. So that's a significant news. That's something that you need to know for civil services examination. Let's look at another question. Which of the following is true regarding Project Soli? It's a gesture recognition technology based on radar. Now let me tell you something more regarding this Project Soli. Project Soli is driven by Google's ATAP team, Advanced Technology and Projects team. This was first showcased way back in 2015. Now the idea is that there has to be a radar chip, and this radar chip will detect hand movements. And through these hand movements, you can control your phone. Let's say, for example, you're sleeping and suddenly there is an alarm ringing. Now you'll have to press the snooze button. For that, you will have to get up and press the snooze button. Or there is a song playing in your playlist. You want to change the song. For that, you have to physically touch your phone and then change the song. Now, because of this ATAP project, because of this Project Soli, what you can do, you can use your hand to make various gestures, and these gestures will be interpreted by your phone, and then you can change your song without physically touching your phone. You can turn off your snooze button without physically touching your phone. That is something that is called Project Soli, which is a dedicated radar chip on the front of the Pixel 4 phone released by Google. But this phone is not coming to India. Why? There can be an important prelims based question here. This Soli radar chip works on 60 gigahertz spectrum frequency. However, in India, this 60 gigahertz spectrum is not commercially usable. That is perhaps the reason why Pixel 4 is not coming to India. Now let's look at another question. Previous year's prelims based question 2019. Why is there a great concern about the microbeads that are released into environment? Because they are considered harmful to marine ecosystems. Mains based question. Why a section of the Land Acquisition Act has turned into a big judicial controversy? Comment on the need to follow judicial discipline. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.